I've often wondered if things would have turned out differently had my life not been so deeply marked by loss. At 15, I was left with a void too big to understand, too heavy to carry. My parents were killed in a car accident, leaving me to navigate life alone in a way no one my age should have to. I can still remember the shrill sound of the phone ringing that night, the way my hands trembled as I picked it up. It's a memory that's seared into my mind, one that I try to keep buried beneath layers of achievement and busyness. The days that followed were a blur: funerals, condolences, and the sharp sting of finality. It felt like the world was moving on while I was stuck, stranded in the silence they left behind. After their death, I threw myself into my studies. It was the only way I knew how to survive. Becoming an architect wasn't just a career choice, it was a lifeline. It was a way to prove to myself that I could build something from the wreckage of my life. By the time I turned 30, I had established myself as one of the most respected architects in the city. I had designed everything from high-rise buildings to intimate residential homes, each project a testament to the work I'd poured my heart into. But somewhere in between all the accolades and late nights, I lost track of what truly mattered: myself. I built a career, but I had no personal life to speak of. There were no deep conversations at the dinner table, no partners to share my successes and failures with. Love wasn't something I allowed myself to think about. There was always another project, another design, another deadline. My life revolved around structures, both concrete and emotional. Then one day I met Victor. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something close to it. Victor was kind in a way that made me feel seen, something I hadn't realized I was missing. He was different from the men I'd known in the past. He didn't just talk about business or the next big project. Instead, he asked me about my day, my dreams, my childhood. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone else. There was an ease about him, an honesty that I hadn't expected but desperately needed. We married after 2 years of dating, a decision that felt right in the moment. I had my doubts, but who wouldn't? Marriage is a leap of faith, isn't it? The first year was bliss. Victor was attentive, loving, and in many ways, he helped fill the emptiness I'd been carrying for so long. But then, like a slow tide rising, things began to change. It started with the phone calls, those long, drawn-out conversations he had with his mother, Monica. I could tell there was tension in his voice when he spoke to her, but I didn't think much of it at first. It was only when she began to visit more frequently that I started noticing the undercurrents of unease. First, it was harmless. Monica would drop by for dinner or stay the weekend. But soon it became more than just visits. One day, without any prior warning, she moved in. I remember the day she arrived like it was yesterday. I was at work finalizing designs for a new commercial project when I got a call from Victor. "Sarah, there's something I need to talk to you about when you get home," he said, his voice tight, uncertain. I'd heard the stress in his voice before, but I couldn't quite place why. "What's wrong, Victor?" "It's Monica," he said. She's going to stay with us for a while." I paused, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "Stay with us? For how long?" "As long as it takes," he replied. And I knew then that this was more than just a visit. When I arrived home that evening, the house felt different. Monica was sitting on the couch in the living room, her bags already unpacked, as if she'd lived there for years. There was an air of finality about her presence, and it took everything in me to suppress the urge to ask why she had just moved into our home without so much as a discussion. Victor was standing beside her, looking uneasy, torn between his loyalty to his mother and his desire to keep the peace in our home. I tried to mask my surprise with a smile, but inside, a knot was already forming in my stomach. Monica wasn't a bad woman, far from it, but there was something about her that made me feel like an intruder in my own life. It wasn't just that she was overly critical of the things I did, like how I cooked or how I kept the house. It was the way she did it. Constantly, relentlessly, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I tried at first to make the best of it. I woke up early to prepare breakfast, cleaned up after dinner, did whatever I could to make Monica feel welcome. But it never felt like enough. She would criticize my cooking, suggest that I do things differently around the house, or even comment on my career choices. Every little thing I did seemed to be wrong in her eyes. And Victor? He said nothing. He watched from the sidelines, his gaze averted when I needed him most. In the beginning, I couldn't understand it. Why would he allow his mother to treat me this way? Why didn't he defend me? But slowly I began to see the truth. Victor wasn't just dealing with a controlling mother. He was battling his own guilt. He was caught in the middle, trapped by a lifetime of his mother's expectations, and he didn't know how to break free. The tension between us grew, silent but palpable. The man I had once trusted and loved seemed to slip further away, and the life we had built together started to feel less like a partnership and more like an arrangement. I had always been a woman of strength, resilient, determined, self-reliant. But as I looked around at the life I had built, I couldn't help but feel that I was slowly losing myself. The days that followed Monica's sudden move-in became a blur of frustration and exhaustion. I had always prided myself on my ability to handle any challenge, to juggle multiple projects at work while maintaining balance at home. But this was different. This wasn't just another deadline or design flaw to correct. This was my life unraveling thread by thread, under the weight of someone else's constant judgment. Every morning, I woke up earlier than usual to prepare breakfast for Victor and Monica. I made sure everything was perfect, every detail accounted for. I could tell that Monica scrutinized everything I did, watching me as I cooked, cleaned, and organized the house with an intensity that made me feel like I was always under a microscope. The meals were never good enough. She would always have something to say about the way I seasoned the food, the arrangement of the dishes, or even the time I served it. "You should try using more garlic next time, dear," she would say in that polite, yet condescending tone of hers. Or, in our family we always keep the kitchen a little tidier. It wasn't just the food. Every inch of the house was criticized. The living room was too cluttered, the guest bathroom wasn't up to her standards, and the pillows on the couch weren't fluffed properly. I tried to keep a smile on my face, to act like it didn't hurt, but inside I was crumbling. It felt like nothing I did was ever enough. I would pour myself into each task, hoping to earn a moment of praise, but I was met instead with endless nitpicking. Victor, of course, said nothing. I could hear the tension in his voice when he spoke to his mother, but it was always followed by an uncomfortable silence, a sense of avoidance that spoke louder than any words could. He never stood up for me. He never told his mother that I was doing my best, that I was trying to build a home, not a battlefield. His passivity felt like a slap in the face every time Monica made a cutting remark. It was like I was invisible not just to Monica but to Victor as well. At first, I told myself I was being too sensitive. After all, I knew Monica had a certain way of doing things, and perhaps she didn't mean to make me feel small. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of her criticisms grew unbearable. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had gotten here. How had this woman come to control my life so completely? How had I let myself become so small in the eyes of the people I loved? I tried to keep the peace. I smiled, I nodded, and I did my best to ignore the hurtful comments. But every word, every disapproving glance, dug deeper into my heart, leaving scars I couldn't heal. I started to lose sight of the woman I had once been, the confident, strong architect who had made her way in the world on her own. Now I was just a shadow of that person, a woman desperately trying to please someone who would never be satisfied. There were moments when I would catch a glimpse of Victor. He'd be sitting in the living room, his back to me as he listened to his mother's latest tirade about how I wasn't doing things the right way. He would nod, his eyes not meeting mine, and I could see that he was torn. I wasn't blind to the fact that he loved me. I knew he did. But I also knew that his loyalty to his mother ran deeper than his love for me. And in those moments I couldn't help but wonder, what had I gotten myself into? Victor's silence was like a chasm between us, a gap that seemed to grow wider with every passing day. I tried to talk to him about it, to express how I was feeling, but the words never came out right. I would try to explain how hurtful Monica's constant criticism was, how her presence made me feel like I was losing myself in a home that no longer felt like mine. But each time he would shrug it off, offering a weak apology that didn't feel like enough. "I know it's tough, Sarah," he would say. "I'll talk to her, I promise." But nothing ever changed. And each time he promised to talk to her, I felt a little more invisible, a little more insignificant. I wasn't asking for him to choose between me and his mother, but I did expect him to protect me, to stand by my side when I was struggling. But that never happened. Instead, I became the person who was constantly apologizing, For not being good enough, for not meeting Monica's expectations, for not fitting into a mold that was never mine to begin with. The isolation crept in slowly at first, like the quiet hum of a distant storm, but before long it consumed me. I found myself withdrawing more and more from Victor. I couldn't bear the thought of talking to him, only to have him brush off my feelings once again. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay when I felt like I was suffocating. And when I wasn't withdrawing into myself, I was busy trying to make everything perfect, my meals, my cleaning, my work. Anything to avoid the emotional chaos that was swirling around me. I began to question my worth in the relationship. Was I just a placeholder in Victor's life? A woman who filled a space that his mother was too reluctant to let go of? Was I just an accessory to the life they had built together before I ever came along? Every time Monica opened her mouth, I felt more and more like a stranger in my own home. I was no longer the woman Victor had fallen in love with. I was a woman who was constantly bending and stretching, trying to accommodate someone who would never accept me for who I truly was. And the more I thought about it, the more it became clear. I wasn't just fighting against Monica. I was fighting for my place in my own life. I had become a ghost in my own home, existing only to fulfill the needs of others while losing sight of my own. And I couldn't keep living like that. But what could I do? The weight of it all seemed too much to bear. I loved Victor, but love wasn't enough. I had spent my whole life building something, my career, my dreams, my independence, but somehow none of it mattered in the face of this endless criticism. I needed to make a choice between continuing to live in a marriage that was suffocating me or reclaiming the life I had worked so hard to build. And deep down I knew what I had to do. I had to choose myself. It had been a long, grueling few months. Monica's presence in our home had grown unbearable, and the tension between Victor and me had reached a breaking point. I felt like I was sinking under the weight of my own life, lost between a demanding career and a marriage that felt more like an obligation than a partnership. I had always believed that success in my work would be the anchor, that it would keep me grounded and give me purpose. But with every day that passed, the walls around me seemed to close in tighter. Then one morning everything changed. I received a call from the city's top development firm, an architecture project that had been in the works for months, one I had been eagerly waiting for. They told me I had been selected to design a major new complex, one that would redefine the city's skyline. This was the kind of opportunity one had dreamed of for years. This project wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about proving to myself that I had made it, that my parents' dreams for me had not been in vain. I was ecstatic. My heart raced as I hung up the phone. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel a spark of excitement, the kind that had been buried under layers of stress and disappointment. This was my moment, my big break. When I got home, I couldn't wait to share the news with Victor. The weight of everything I had been carrying seemed to lift, and I was eager to celebrate with him. I imagined us sitting down together, discussing the future, planning for what was to come. I wanted to share this victory with him, to show him that the years of sacrifice and hard work had paid off. Victor was sitting on the couch when I walked in, his face buried in his phone. Monica, as usual, was hovering nearby, offering unsolicited advice about something irrelevant. I cleared my throat, trying to get Victor's attention. "Victor, I have amazing news," I said, my voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "I just got the project, the one I've been working toward for years. They've officially selected me to design the new development downtown." I waited for his reaction, my heart in my throat. This was big for me, big for us. This could change everything. Victor glanced up from his phone, his expression unreadable. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, pride, excitement, maybe even a little bit of awe. But it was gone in a flash, replaced by his usual guarded indifference. "That's great," he said flatly, returning his attention to his phone. "Congrats." His lack of enthusiasm hit me harder than I expected. My smile faltered, and I felt the weight of the disappointment settle deep in my chest. He wasn't even looking at me. His response was as mechanical as ever, devoid of the warmth I had hoped for. It was as if he didn't understand how much this meant to me, how much it meant to my future. I turned to Monica, desperate for some kind of validation. "Mom, did you hear? This is the opportunity I've been waiting for." Monica looked up, her expression as cold and calculating as always. "Oh, that's nice," she said, offering no enthusiasm. "But I think it's a lot of work for you, Sarah. Are you sure you can handle it with all the responsibilities you already have here at home?" Her words were like a slap to the face. "I'm perfectly capable, Monica," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is what I've been working for." Victor, still not looking at me, mumbled something about it being a big responsibility and not to get too stressed out. But I could barely hear him. All I could focus on was the hollow feeling in my chest, the crushing weight of his indifference. Was it too much to ask for him to be proud of me? To show some sign that he understood how much this meant? I excused myself and retreated to the bedroom, feeling the sting of rejection settle in my heart. It wasn't just that he didn't seem happy for me. It was that he hadn't even bothered to ask how I felt about the project, about the work that had consumed my thoughts for months. It was the absence of any emotional connection between us, the lack of understanding, the emotional distance that had been growing between us for far too long. As I stood by the window staring out at the city skyline, I realized something. I wasn't just battling Monica's constant interference anymore. That had become the least of my worries. The real battle was the one I was fighting with Victor, the one where he seemed to have lost any real interest in me, in my happiness, in my dreams. I had always known that marriage wasn't easy, that relationships required work. But this wasn't work anymore. This was a slow unraveling. The excitement I had once felt when I looked at Victor was slipping away, replaced by a creeping sense of isolation. His passivity, his inability to stand up for me or offer the support I needed, was suffocating me. In the past, I had always relied on my work to ground me, to give me purpose. But now it felt like even my career was being diminished, overshadowed by the emotional void in my marriage. What was the point of achieving success if the person I wanted to share it with didn't even seem to care? The project should have been a moment of celebration, a bright spot in a sea of difficulty. But instead it felt like another lonely milestone, one I would have to conquer alone. I spent the next few days throwing myself into the project, keeping busy to distract myself from the growing tension at home. But even as I worked, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Every time I shared a new idea or progress with Victor, his responses were lukewarm, detached. It was like he wasn't even really listening, and every time he spoke, it felt like a reminder that I was alone in this. I had spent years building my career, crafting a life for myself out of nothing but hard work and ambition. But now I realized I was at a crossroads. I was no longer just fighting for my career. I was fighting for my place in a relationship that had begun to drain the very life out of me. The cracks in our marriage were no longer just visible. They were wide open and I could see them clearly. Monica's presence had been the catalyst, but it was Victor's indifference that had pushed me to the edge. He wasn't just emotionally distant. He was emotionally neglectful. And I couldn't keep living like this, not anymore. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep waiting for someone to care. I had to care for myself first. I had to reclaim my life. Not just my career, but my happiness, my peace, my sense of worth. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this project, this dream I had worked so hard for, was the sign I needed. It wasn't just about the buildings I would create. It was about rebuilding myself, my sense of self, my strength, my independence. And that was a journey I wasn't going to take with anyone but myself. The days that followed my realization about Victor's indifference were some of the hardest I had ever endured. I had worked my entire life for a career that had brought me success, recognition, and the satisfaction of knowing I was good at what I did. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on my projects, the gaping emotional void in my marriage consumed me. Monica's presence in our home had become unbearable. Her constant interference, a steady drip of criticism that threatened to drown me. But it was Victor's silence that hurt the most. As the weeks wore on, I found myself becoming more withdrawn, losing interest in things I once loved. I had always prided myself on my independence, on my ability to face challenges head-on. But now it felt as though I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. My work, my passions, my marriage, it all felt like a tangled mess of frustrations I couldn't untangle. It was a Thursday evening when everything changed. I had just come back from a meeting with my team about the new project. Another frustrating encounter where Victor barely acknowledged my success, even though it was something I had worked for, fought for, dreamed of. I needed some space, so I decided to take a walk around the block, hoping that the fresh air would clear my mind. When I returned, the house was quiet. Too quiet. There was no sound of Monica's usual chatter, no TV playing in the background. The stillness felt wrong. I glanced around, expecting to see Victor in the living room, but he wasn't there. I walked toward the bedroom, thinking he was simply taking a nap after a long day, but what I heard from the other side of the door stopped me in my tracks. I had no intention of eavesdropping, but the conversation I overheard shattered me in a way I never expected. Victor's voice was soft but clear. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom. I love her, but I can't keep living like this. You're right. She's been distant and I can't make her happy." Monica's voice followed, filled with an unsettling calm. "Victor, you've tried your best. But it's obvious she doesn't appreciate you. And you know I've been saying this for months. You need to let her go. She's too focused on her career, and she's not the woman you married anymore. You need someone who will stand by you, someone who doesn't treat you like a second thought." A chill ran down my spine as I heard Monica continue. "I've already taken care of everything. I've had the divorce papers prepared. I've given them to you. All you have to do is sign, and we can finally put an end to this." I felt as if the floor beneath me had crumbled away. The conversation was like a punch to the gut, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Victor had already signed the papers. He had already made the decision to end our marriage, and Monica had been the driving force behind it all. It wasn't just his silence or his indifference that had pushed me to the edge. It was his betrayal. For years, I had tried to make the best of a difficult situation. I had tried to love Victor, to build a life with him despite his emotional neglect. But now I saw it all for what it truly was. A slow, painful unraveling of a marriage that had never really been mine. It had always been a marriage that catered to Monica's needs. A union that had been manipulated by her control. And Victor, the man I had trusted with my heart, had allowed it to happen. I stepped back from the door, my heart racing as my emotions swirled into a frenzy. I felt numb, disconnected from the woman I had once been. I couldn't bear the thought of staying in a marriage where I was treated as an afterthought, a burden to be discarded when it was no longer convenient. I walked into the kitchen where I sat down at the table, my hands shaking. The silence of the house felt suffocating, the weight of everything crashing down on me all at once. I could feel the anger rising inside me, but it wasn't just anger. It was a feeling of betrayal, of disappointment, and a deep sadness that consumed me. How could Victor, the man I had married, the man I had believed in, let this happen? How could he betray me so completely? But as I sat there, something else started to take shape inside me. It was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time: empowerment. It was a quiet but powerful realization. I didn't need Victor. I didn't need Monica. I didn't need anyone to define me or my worth. I could take control of my life. I could walk away from this, and I would. I stood up, my anger now simmering beneath the surface, but it wasn't just anger anymore. It was the fire I had needed for so long. I walked to the bedroom, where I found the divorce papers Monica had spoken of. There they were, sitting on the bed, just waiting for me to sign. It was the final straw, the moment I realized that if I signed these papers, I would be accepting my role as a failure, as someone who had let others dictate the course of my life. I stared at the papers for a long time, my mind racing. I could sign them and walk away quietly, or I could take the chance to reclaim my life, to live on my own terms. In a moment of clarity, I made my decision. I would not sign those papers. I would not let them define me. I would walk away, not as a woman defeated, but as a woman who had finally found her strength. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own destiny. I wasn't going to let Monica or Victor tear me down any longer. I would leave, and I would build the life I had always dreamed of. A life where I wasn't someone else's afterthought, where my dreams and ambitions were my own to pursue. I marched to the living room, my resolve hardening with each step. Victor was still sitting there, his eyes glued to his phone. He didn't even look up when I entered the room. "Victor," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I'm leaving. I'm done. I'm not going to live like this anymore." His head shot up in surprise, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. What are you talking about, Sarah? I'm talking about the divorce, I said, holding up the papers. You and your mother can have whatever you want. But I'm not going to sign these. I'm leaving, and I'm going to live my life on my own terms. Victor opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't give him a chance. I'm done, Victor. I've tried. I've given everything I had, but it's never been enough. And I'm not going to keep fighting for something that doesn't exist anymore. I'm leaving. This is the end. With that, I turned and walked out, not looking back. I didn't need to look back. I had already made the choice that would change everything. I was no longer a woman trapped in a marriage that wasn't mine. I was free. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed in the stillness of the house, a finality that reverberated through my soul. I had left everything behind: Victor, Monica, the life I had tried to build with them. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long had finally lifted. There was no turning back now. As I sat in the car, the cool breeze from the open window brushing against my face, I found myself reflecting on a time long ago. My father's voice, so vivid in my memory, filled my mind. You will face great challenges in life, but no one can take away your dreams if you remain determined. Those words had been my anchor when I was younger, after losing my parents. They had shaped me into the woman I had become. Strong, independent, and resilient. It wasn't easy to push through the heartache of my past, but my father's wisdom had always reminded me that no matter what I faced, no one could take away my dreams if I held on to them tightly enough. And that was exactly what I was doing now. Holding on to my dreams, refusing to let them slip away just because life had become difficult. I was going to face the challenges ahead with the same determination that had guided me all these years. I wasn't just leaving a marriage or a home. I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one where I could finally be free. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. And as I drove away, the path ahead was mine to carve. A few days later, I found myself in Dubai, on a work trip for a new design project I had just been given. It was one of the first projects I had taken on since leaving Victor, and I threw myself into it with renewed vigor. It was as if I had discovered a part of myself that had been buried for far too long. My creativity flowed more freely, my ideas felt more vibrant, and for the first time in a while I felt like I was truly living. I had been so consumed by my personal turmoil that I had nearly forgotten to check my email that morning. But when I did, my heart nearly stopped. There, in bold letters, was the subject line that took my breath away. Shortlisted for International Architecture Award. My fingers trembled as I clicked open the message. It was real. I had been shortlisted for the most prestigious award in my field, the International Architecture Award. This was the recognition I had always dreamed of, the achievement my father had hoped for me when he first saw my passion for design all those years ago. Tears welled up in my eyes as I sat there, stunned. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after the years of working tirelessly, after the heartbreak, the sacrifices, and the isolation, I had made it. This was my moment. I thought about my father, who had passed away before he could see my success. I thought about how proud he would have been, how much this moment would have meant to him. I could almost hear his voice cheering me on, telling me that my dreams were worth every ounce of struggle, every sleepless night, every tear I had shed. But it wasn't just the award that made this moment so special. It was the realization that I had gotten here on my own, without anyone's help, without anyone's approval. I had made it through the darkest times of my life, and now I was standing on the precipice of the brightest future I could imagine. I knew this was only the beginning. I had a long way to go, but this was proof that I was on the right path. I could already see the next steps in front of me. More projects, more opportunities, more success. This wasn't just a career milestone. It was a personal triumph. But the surprises didn't end there. As I sat in my hotel room, still processing the excitement of the email, I received a small package at the door. It was from an old friend, someone I had lost contact with years ago. Inside the package was a painting, carefully wrapped in protective paper. I unwrapped it slowly, unsure of what to expect. When I saw the painting, my heart skipped a beat. It was an image of a door. An open door leading to a bright, bustling city. I recognized it instantly. This was the painting my father had given me years ago, just before he passed away. He had told me it symbolized my future, the future he dreamed for me. At the time, I had never fully understood what he meant. But now, as I stood there looking at the painting, it all made sense. The city beyond the door was filled with possibility. It was a world of opportunity, of success, of freedom. Everything I had been searching for. And the door itself? It was a symbol of the choice I had made to walk through it, to step into a life that was mine to create. Tears blurred my vision as I traced the image with my finger. My father had always believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. And now it felt as if he were with me, guiding me every step of the way. I knew without a doubt that this was my journey. This was the path I was meant to walk, one of independence, success, and freedom. I was no longer shackled by the past, by Victor, by Monica, or anyone else. The world was mine for the taking, and I was going to seize it with both hands. I took the painting and placed it on the wall, right in front of my desk where I could see it every day. It would be a constant reminder of the promise my father had made to me, and the promise I had made to myself. I was going to build the life I had always dreamed of, no matter the cost. As I sat down at my desk, looking out at the city skyline beyond the window, I knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, and there would be moments of doubt. But I was ready. I had my father's words to guide me, the strength within myself, and the determination to make it through anything that came my way. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And nothing, no one could take that away from me. The door had opened and I was walking through it, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The days that followed my time in Dubai were a whirlwind. The recognition, the award nomination, it was all a dream come true. I had poured myself into my career for years, and now finally, I was receiving the acknowledgement I had long desired. But as much as I relished the triumph, something still lingered in the back of my mind. The path I had walked to get to this point had been hard one, and my emotions, tangled with the remnants of my past, weren't as easy to shake off as I had hoped. When I returned home from the trip, there was a strange sense of unease that settled in my chest. The city had changed since I'd left, or perhaps it was just me who had changed. Everything felt lighter, more expansive, and yet, as I walked through the front door of the house I had once shared with Victor, there was a subtle heaviness that followed me in. It was late, the house quiet. I had been keeping myself busy with work, eager to forget the last few months, but something inside me had begun to stir. I didn't know what it was, but I knew something was waiting for me. Victor wasn't home. He hadn't been home much recently, which wasn't unusual. His work had always been demanding, but that fact didn't sit well with me anymore. As I walked through the house preparing to settle in for the evening, my gaze fell on a drawer in the corner of the bedroom, one I had never really noticed before. It was a small, unassuming drawer, nothing special. But tonight, something about it caught my attention. Without thinking, I walked over to it and opened it. At first, it was just a jumble of papers and old receipts. But then something caught my eye. A photo nestled between a stack of documents. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling as I unfolded it. It was a picture of Victor standing with a woman I didn't recognize. She was beautiful, with a warm smile and eyes that seemed to hold a secret. The photograph was old, slightly faded, but the faces were clear. The woman was standing beside Victor, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. And then there was Monica, standing just a bit too close to Victor, her hand firmly placed on his other shoulder. Her face was tight, her smile strained, and I couldn't help but notice the way she seemed to hover over him, almost possessively. I stared at the photo for a long time, my mind racing. Who was this woman? Why had I never seen her before? I set the photo down and ran my fingers over it, feeling the cool edge of the paper. And then it hit me. The woman in the picture had to be important to Victor. She had to be someone from his past, someone he cared about deeply. That's when it clicked. Victor's biological mother. The realization struck me like a cold gust of wind. Victor's biological mother. She was someone who had been a part of his life long before I ever came into the picture. And suddenly, the dynamics of his relationship with Monica began to make sense in a way I hadn't fully understood before. I felt a knot tighten in my chest as I processed the image, the picture of a life that had always been hidden from me. The woman in the photo had passed away long before I met Victor. But the implications of that photograph, the emotional weight it carried, were not lost on me. Monica's tight grip on Victor, the way she kept him isolated, her overbearing presence in our lives, all of it began to make sense. Monica had never truly accepted me into the family, and now I knew why. It wasn't just because of her critical nature or her need to control every aspect of our lives. It wasn't just her relentless criticism of my every move. Monica had never let go of Victor. She had never let him build a life outside of her own, outside of the role she had created for him. And I was the threat, the outsider, the one who had come in and broken the balance of their relationship. I set the photo down gently on the desk, my heart racing as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just a family that had been dysfunctional. It was a family trapped in a toxic cycle of dependency. Monica had never allowed Victor to form a healthy, independent bond with anyone, not even with me. I couldn't just ignore the photo, though. My curiosity gnawed at me. I needed to know more. I needed to understand why Monica had been so controlling, why Victor had allowed it, and how it had shaped our relationship. So, I did what any rational person would do when faced with a mystery. I began to investigate. Over the next few days, I spent hours looking into the woman in the photograph. I went through old family albums, dug through Victor's childhood keepsakes, and asked questions. Questions that I had been too afraid to ask before. And with each passing hour, the truth became clearer. The woman in the photograph wasn't just Victor's mother. She was the person he had once loved the most. The person who had shaped his entire world. But she was gone now. And Monica had never let go. I spoke to a few of Victor's old friends, trying to piece together the past. What I learned was more than I had bargained for. Monica had spent years clinging to her son after his biological mother passed away, refusing to let him have a life of his own. She had sabotaged every relationship he tried to build, convinced him that no one would ever be good enough for him. And Victor, ever the dutiful son, had quietly accepted this, never questioning the control she had over his life. The more I uncovered, the more I understood how deeply Monica's obsession with Victor had influenced everything. It explained so much: his emotional neglect of me, his inability to stand up for our relationship, and most of all, the deep-seated fear he had of disappointing his mother. And I realized something that struck me to my core. Victor had never really been mine to lose. He had always belonged to Monica. I had been an illusion, a brief distraction in the life they had created for themselves. I had never truly been accepted into their family because I was a threat to the suffocating bond they shared. I confronted Victor that night, sitting across from him in the same living room where we used to laugh and talk about our future. The photograph was between us, and I could see the color drain from his face as I held it up. "Victor," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Who is this woman?" His eyes flickered to the photo, and for a moment, he seemed to hesitate. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Tell me." I pressed, my heart pounding in my chest. "Why did you never tell me about her?" He swallowed hard, his eyes avoiding mine. He was silent for a long time before he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "She was my mother. The one I loved. The one who raised me. And Monica, she never let me move on from her." And just like that, everything clicked into place. Victor had never been free. Monica had kept him captive in a world that existed only for the two of them, and I had never truly stood a chance. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just sad. Sad for the man who had never been allowed to live for himself. And sad for the relationship that had never been real. In that moment, I understood that I had to let go. Let go of the man I had loved, and let go of the dreams I had built with him. It wasn't just a marriage that had died. It was the last vestiges of a life I had tried so hard to create. And now I was free to rebuild my own. The divorce was final. The papers had been signed. The weight of years spent in a relationship that had never been fully mine had been lifted. It felt like stepping out of a fog and into the sunlight. There was no more pretending, no more living in someone else's shadow. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without the pressure of someone else's expectations hanging over me. I had rented a luxurious high-rise apartment, something that was mine, something that I had chosen for myself. The view from the top floor was breathtaking, stretching far beyond the city skyline. And every time I looked out the window, I saw the world laid out before me, full of potential and opportunity. This apartment wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for and the life I was now building. It was mine. All mine. I also opened my own architecture firm. The process wasn't easy, but nothing worth doing ever was. I had poured every ounce of energy I had into making my dream a reality. At first, the early days were slow, and there were moments when I questioned whether I had made the right choice. But soon the projects began to flow in one after another. My reputation grew. People started to take notice. And with every successful design, I felt more confident in the path I had chosen. It wasn't long before I became the first woman in my field to win the prestigious International Architecture Award. The honor was more than just a trophy on my shelf. It was the culmination of a lifetime of hard work, resilience, and determination. It was a recognition not just of my talents as an architect, but of my ability to overcome the challenges that life had thrown my way. The award ceremony was everything I had dreamed of and more. The applause echoed in my ears as I walked up to the stage to accept the award, and for the first time, I allowed myself to truly feel proud. I had fought for this. I had earned this. But as I held the award in my hands, I realized something that went beyond the recognition. It wasn't the accolade that had brought me joy, it was the journey of self-discovery, of reclaiming my life, and of finding strength where I had once believed there was none. I wasn't just the woman who had won an award. I was the woman who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. I was no longer the neglected wife, trying to please others and live up to someone else's expectations. I was an independent, strong, and successful woman, fully in control of her own destiny. The months that followed were filled with new opportunities. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with when I had been consumed by my marriage and my work. I made time for the people who had always believed in me, who had supported me from the beginning, long before I had ever thought about winning awards or opening my own firm. I shared my success with them, but more importantly, I shared my freedom. I took trips, explored new hobbies, and rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried for years. I took on exciting new projects, some of which pushed my creative limits. These weren't just buildings to me. They were statements, manifestations of my independence, my vision, and my future. Each project brought new challenges, but I faced them with confidence, knowing that I had the strength to handle whatever came my way. As I worked and grew, I began to realize something even more profound. My happiness wasn't dependent on external validation anymore. For so many years, I had sought approval from others, first from my parents, then from Victor, and from the people around me. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove my worth through my work and my relationships. But now, I understood that true fulfillment came from within. I had spent so much time feeling like I needed someone else to affirm my value. But in reality, the only validation that mattered was the one I gave myself. I was no longer waiting for someone to tell me that I was worthy. I knew that I was enough just as I was. And that realization brought with it a deep sense of emotional freedom. I learned to trust myself again, to rely on my own instincts and decisions. I didn't need to look to others to feel secure in who I was. I had spent years living for someone else, but now I was living for myself. With this newfound freedom came a sense of peace that I hadn't known before. The constant tension that had defined my marriage, the feeling that I was never enough, that I was always trying to meet someone else's expectations, those feelings no longer had a hold on me. I was free from the emotional shackles that had kept me small for so long. And as I continued to build my career, as I took on bigger and more prestigious projects, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that I had never experienced before. This wasn't just success in the traditional sense, it was success in the truest form. I was finally living my life on my own terms, pursuing my passions and my dreams without anyone telling me how or when to do it. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead. Life was never going to be without its obstacles. But now I had the tools to face them. I had the resilience and the strength to keep moving forward, no matter what. And as I stood in my new office looking out over the city, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. No longer defined by the past, no longer burdened by the weight of others' expectations, I was ready for whatever the future held. I had my dreams, my independence, and my happiness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly free. The path ahead was mine to walk, and I was more than ready to embrace it. The night of the International Architecture Awards had arrived, and I stood backstage, my heart pounding with excitement. It felt like a dream A surreal moment where everything I had worked for, every challenge I had faced was coming to fruition. I had achieved so much already, yet I couldn't help but feel that this award was more than just recognition for my work. It was a symbol of everything I had overcome. It was proof that I had found my strength, my voice, and my place in the world. The ceremony was elegant and grand, with a glittering crowd of the most influential figures in the architectural world. As I walked toward the stage, I felt the eyes of the audience on me, their applause filling the air. But it wasn't just their applause that resonated in my ears. It was my father's voice, as clear and strong as if he were standing beside me. No one can take away your dreams if you remain determined. His words echoed in my mind, and in that moment I understood. I wasn't just standing here because of my career accomplishments. I was here because I had learned how to keep going when everything around me was falling apart. I had built my success on a foundation of resilience, strength, and a determination that had never let me give up, even when I wanted to. As I stepped up to the podium, the world seemed to slow down. I took a deep breath, the weight of everything I had experienced settling over me. I looked out at the sea of faces, their expressions filled with admiration, but it wasn't their approval I needed anymore. It was mine. I stood there, holding the award in my hands, and realized something profound. Success wasn't just about what I had accomplished professionally. It wasn't about winning awards or being recognized for my designs. It was about the journey I had taken to get here. The journey of self-discovery, of overcoming heartbreak, of learning to trust myself when the world seemed to be falling apart. As the applause continued to wash over me, I felt a deep sense of peace. This wasn't just about architecture. It was about rebuilding my life from the ground up. It was about creating a future that was mine, one that reflected who I truly was and what I truly wanted. And this moment, this award, was a symbol of that journey. It was the culmination of everything I had fought for, and everything I had become. I thought back to the days when I was still married to Victor, when I had believed that my worth was tied to the approval of others. I had spent so many years seeking validation from the people around me, first from my parents, then from Victor and Monica. I had thought that if I could prove my worth through my work, through my role as a wife, through my ability to make everyone happy, I would finally be enough. But the truth was, I had been enough all along. It had taken me years to realize that the approval I was seeking wasn't the one that mattered. The only approval I needed was my own. I had spent so much of my life looking for external validation that I hadn't stopped to ask myself what I truly wanted, what I truly needed. And in the end, it wasn't the applause or the awards that fulfilled me. It was the knowledge that I had found my own way, that I had learned to live for myself and not for anyone else. As I held the award in my hands, I understood that the greatest success I could achieve was the freedom to live authentically, to pursue my passions without fear or doubt. The journey I had taken, through the struggles, the heartache, and the setbacks, had made me who I was today. And that person standing on that stage was someone who no longer feared failure, who no longer sought approval from others. The applause continued to echo in the background, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady and strong. I had arrived not because of the accolades or the recognition, but because I had finally learned to trust myself. I had learned that success wasn't just about building something beautiful in the world. It was about building something beautiful inside yourself. As I turned to leave the stage, the spotlight shining brightly on me, I glanced out into the crowd once more. I saw faces I had never met, but I knew they had all played a part in this journey. They had witnessed my growth, my transformation, and now I was free. I wasn't defined by my past, by my marriage, or by the expectations of others. I was defined by my own strength, my own journey, and the life I had created for myself. This award was only the beginning. The world was full of endless possibilities, and I was ready to explore them all. There were new projects to take on, new people to meet, and new experiences to embrace. But more than that, there was a new life waiting for me. A life I had built with my own hands, fueled by my own dreams, and sustained by my own determination. I walked off the stage with my head held high, not because I had won, but because I had finally become the woman I had always meant to be. A woman who was strong, independent, and free. And as I stepped into the future, I knew that nothing and no one could ever take away my dreams again.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for updates on new videos. See you next time.